introduction. I'd like to start out with an award. I'm now the ranking member on the Small Business Committee, and so we have an award for an Oldham County business. It's a Small Business Award of the Week, and we're excited to do this. And the award this week is going to go to Dr. Molly Rutherford.
Thank you.
The award has all this writing, which I'm not going to read to, but I will tell you that I've gotten to know Dr. Rutherford. I've been to her practice. It's an extraordinary practice, an extraordinary concept. She's been involved with addiction. She's written published papers. She actually has a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins. I know a doctor in Washington that could use some advice on public policy. I'm not sure he'll listen, but he sure could hear. He would like a diversity of opinion for him might be a change. But we want to congratulate her for her hard work for the community, but also speaking out about opening schools, getting our kids back, the health effects of our kids not going to school. And people in the schools should take this as a compliment. We like to have our kids in schools and not at home. You know, some people teach them at home, but we do like having them in school. It's good for them to be in school. We hope they'll be back in person. But Molly, congratulations.
Thank you. I just want to say thanks to Dima and Jenny, who actually run the practice. And I wanted to tell you I worked for Fauci. I didn't know if you knew that. Anyway, yeah, he definitely would not listen to me. He doesn't listen to anyone.
Thanks, Molly. Well, it is great to be here. We've taken sort of a circuitous route. We started out in Bowling Green yesterday, went to Glasgow, went to Greensburg, went to Lebanon, went to Willisburg, went to Georgetown, went to Shelbyville, went to Newcastle, and here we are in LaGrange. We made it. We saw some parts of Kentucky. Every time I drive, I see some parts that I've never seen, even though I think I've been everywhere. We were in Black Gnat, Kentucky. Anybody ever been to Black Gnat? We were in Black Gnat. A couple weeks ago, we were in Possum Trot out by Paducah. So we think we've seen almost every corner, but every time I go out, we seem to find new places we haven't been. President Biden gave me some news, and he wanted me to tell you firsthand when I got here. First thing he says, don't say anything else, but tell them I've got this news for them. I said, okay. He said, tell them on July 4th, they can take their mask off inside as long as they don't speak or talk or eat, and as long as the people that they are talking to are in their immediate family only. I think that he might be a little bit out of touch. But the first thing that it strikes me as, and as somebody who is independent-minded and independent-spirited, is that it's fine if they want to give us advice, but the thing is, advice should be advice. We can take it or leave it. We can listen to it. Persuade me. Have the eloquence and the forethought and the facts on your side and persuade me to do something. And there's a difference between a persuasion and a mandate. So if you'd have asked me last year in March, you're 80, 85 years old, you're 75 years old, should we go to church and sit there for 2 hours? I'd probably say, well, no, this COVID's everywhere and people are getting it sitting inside. Did the mask work? Probably not. That's what I'd tell you, but I still wouldn't sit in church for 2 hours. But would I ever tell you you can't go to church? Would I ever command the churches be closed down or the schools be closed down or the church schools be closed down? No, that's not the business of government. People are smarter than you think. The vaccine right now is voluntary. People over 65, 85% of people have taken it. I think that's advisable. I would take it if I were over 65. But I think we shouldn't ignore the science and completely just berate people, beat them over the head, and mandate stuff not based on science. 100 million people in our country have had this disease. This is a conservative CDC estimate. 34 million people tested positive, but if we do an antibody test, actually, how many people had it in this room? All right, so about 7 or 8 people had it. But probably there's another 7 or 8 people, or maybe 10 or 15 people who have antibodies for it, who had it and they didn't know they had it. It's a disease that can be very, very benign and very, very deadly. But if you do the CDC estimates based on antibody surveys, about 100 million people had this. And now over about 200 million people have been vaccinated. If you add them together, you probably get herd immunity. Now, what evidence is there that we're at herd immunity? Well, the numbers have plummeted. We're less than 5,000 cases a day. We have had some days with less than 100 deaths. And you say this online, people are like, oh, you want people to die. 44 people died yesterday and you don't care. It's like, no, but I'm just looking at the numbers and trying to assess where we are on this. Why? Because it makes a decision. Do we need to force vaccinations on newborns? Do we need to force them on 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds? What are the side effects? Shouldn't we ask what are the incidents of side effects from the vaccine versus the disease? If you're over 65, I think it's pretty clear. The side effects of the vaccine are way less than the disease. A disease, you don't want to get this disease. But if you're 5, the chance of dying is about 1 in a million. The chance of being struck by lightning walking down the street is greater than dying from COVID if you're under 25. Shouldn't we at least acknowledge that? If you've got a 10-year-old kid and they say he's got to be vaccinated, should not say, well, he had COVID last month and I went to the doctor and he has antibodies. Do I really have to? There should be some thought process in this. There should be some freedom of choice on what you want to do. If you persuade us, we will listen. 85% of people over 65 took the vaccine. And my guess is if there is another wave, which I don't think there's going to be another big one, but if there is, more people will go back and take it when they see people getting sick. We're not stupid. But the thing is the other side believes that we are, that they are elite enough to know the truth and we can't handle the truth. So when Dr. Fauci first said that no masks work, he was mostly telling the truth, but not completely. By saying no mask work, he was saying it, and he told us already. He says he was lying. But he was lying for our own good because he was afraid you would go out and buy the N95 masks, which do work. If you go to a hospital, if you want to know which masks work, ask a doctor or nurse what mask they wear when they go in the COVID room when somebody has COVID. It's only the N95 mask, and it works only because it's fit very tightly and worn properly and not touched, and you have gloves, and when you leave the room, guess what? The mask goes in the trash and the gloves go in the trash. So there is a protection that works. But if I tell you, if you cut up your t-shirt and wear it, that it's a great idea, they don't work. The pores of every cloth mask are bigger than the virus. They don't work. But he changed his mind and started telling us that all masks work. But that's a disservice also. If you're 80 years old and you're sitting at home and you're going to take care of your spouse, you would want to wear an N95 mask. You don't want to wear a cloth mask because they don't work. So he's once again encouraging you to engage in behavior that is dangerous with faulty information. He's not being honest with it because we're not smart enough to handle the truth, he thinks. But here's the other thing. If you're 80 years old, and people on television don't realize this, but if I'm 58 years old, if my wife gets sick, I'm staying with her. That's just my choice, and a lot of people are that way. But the thing is there's a treatment if your wife is sick or your husband is sick to prevent you from getting the disease. Monoclonal antibodies have been studied, and if you give monoclonal antibodies to somebody who's sick, who their spouse they're taking care of, there's a much lower incidence of getting the infection and a much higher incidence of surviving it. There are also some other over-the-counter treatments or prescription treatments that people have tried, but they're out there, but I haven't heard Dr. Fauci say one word about it. He's on TV 10 times a day, but he could be helping save lives. In fact, I think he will be responsible for tens of thousands of lives in India lost. Why? Because instead of prioritizing the vaccine to those who haven't had it, he's saying everybody should get it. What's terrible advice? You should start with those over 65. And then next you should do probably those overweight and over 40. And the very last people in line should be the youngest people, if at all. But you should prioritize it. There's not enough vaccine for the people that want it in India. They were having 6,000 deaths a day for the last couple of weeks. It's come down now. But the thing is they're talking about 2 years to vaccinate enough people to get to where they need to go. Well, it might do better if you weren't vaccinating the people who already had the disease. That cuts out millions of people. If you don't vaccinate the children, that cuts out millions of people, and you can target the people most at risk. These seem to me to be common sense, but he denies every one of these. That's the only reason they're talking about vaccinating children. They don't think we're at herd immunity, and in all likelihood we are. Will the vaccine be pretty safe for kids? Probably, but it should be your choice. You shouldn't be told it's like, oh, well, public school's a privilege. Well, I thought I paid taxes for the public school. I'm not going to get to go unless I'm vaccinated. My kid can't go to college unless they take the vaccine. He had it 2 months ago. Has anybody studied whether or not you get more side effects if you've already had the disease and you get the vaccine? We do know this, that if you've had the disease and you get the vaccine, you get 1,000 times more response, an immune response, than someone who hasn't had the disease. It might be good. You might be 1,000 times better, or it could be that's where the side effects come from having so much of an immune response. We don't know the answer, but we should ask the questions. The bottom line is it's a different worldview. I'm of the worldview that I believe in freedom so strongly that I believe in the freedom for you to disagree with me, the freedom to make your own choice. And like I say, while I would tell you maybe last month or in January or whenever not to go to church if you were at risk, I would never command that. It is your choice. My in-laws, we got them the vaccine immediately. My dad, for those of you who know, I'm not always persuasive with my dad. He would not take the vaccine. But it's his choice. He's 85 years old. He's lived a long life. That's his choice. We're going to hold people down. It's a free country. Make your decision. Persuade people. And I'm not trying to persuade people not to. But in a free society, you make your own health care choices. They shouldn't be commanded. I don't want to live in a world where I got to present papers, particularly to a bunch of nincompoops who aren't obeying the science. I've already had it. I got as much immunity. They're like, you don't know how long your immunity will last. You don't know how long your vaccine will last. My immunity's lasted for 1.5 years by most of the studies. And the vaccine's been around 6 months and it's doing pretty well. I'm not denying that the vaccine won't last for a while. Why do you deny natural immunity is going to last? Nobody knows. But the bottom line is we're going to get beyond this, and we should learn some things from this. One of the most important battles over the separation of powers occurred from this, not in Washington, but in Frankfurt. And I think this is worth addressing because it makes a difference as to what happens the next time this comes around. In our state, the governor, and in many states, issued executive orders. And these executive orders, he said how many people could gather. This was illegal for most of last year. How many people can be in a restaurant, whether a restaurant can open. Apparently, COVID comes out after 10 p.m. because you can drink all you want before 10 p.m., but between 10 and 11, buddy, the COVID is out there in the bar, so you got to be gone. There's no science based on that. Telling an 8th grade kid they can't run in the track meet outside without a mask, that's just not scientific at all. It's imbecilic. I mean, there's no science behind any of that. And yet everybody's like told to meekly submit. Coaches were fired from schools for not mandating masks to be worn outside. No science behind any of this. All conjecture, all based on the whims of one person, the governor. It's the reason we fought for probably more than 1,000 years now against centralization of power. Because the thing is even if you agree with a lot of what I'm saying, you don't want me to dictate things. You don't want one person to be in charge of your decisions. We debate back and forth, and not everybody's going to agree. You make your decisions. That's the kind of country we wanted. It's why they fought against the king. It's why they had the Magna Carta at Runnymede. It's why all that happened. Why we separated. It was all about centralization of power and checks and balances. So our state legislature is supposed to be a check and balance. But we have one defect, and we're going to correct it, hopefully in the next time we have an election in 2022, and that is, should the legislature be able to call themselves into session? I'd say without question now that it's yes. Because the governor was in office for 9 months, and they could do nothing. There was no law they could pass, no rebuke, nothing they could say, and he completely ignored them and did what he wanted. So they've voted, and I think that's going to be on the ballot in 2022. Can the state legislature call themselves back in session? I think it should be a yes, because it's a check and balance to any governor. I don't care whether they're a Republican or a Democrat. I think the Republicans will win next time. I really think we'll win the governorship. But I want the Republican governor to be limited in power. I want there to be checks and balances. It isn't about party, it's about power. So the state legislature came back in January, and they passed a law that says, their previous law that they passed in the 90s, which allowed the governor to have executive power, that after 30 days his orders would expire unless approved by the legislature. This seems to be eminently reasonable. It seems to be the check and balance that we need. The governor immediately sued in court and said that his powers are inherent. I think it's the divine right of governors or something he's referring to. He says he has power that's inherently his in times of public health crisis. But it's uncertain which way the Supreme Court will rule. This is maybe the most important Supreme Court ruling in Kentucky in our lifetime. They're going to rule over whether the state legislature can limit powers they gave him. In the 1990s, they gave the governor emergency powers, but these emergency powers were what most of us would think would be an emergency. A tornado comes through the Grange, and the National Guard brings water and food and clothing and tents for a few days and helps you get back on your feet. We could all accept that. That's an emergency. But determining what time a restaurant closes, how many people can be in a restaurant, where you wear a mask, where you don't wear a mask, what kind of mask you wear. All of that stuff can't be done by one person. But this is going to be divided by the Supreme Court. Our legislature was clear. They overrode the veto. They passed it, overrode the veto. And that's going to be the question, though. Are they going to nullify our state legislature? I think it's a horrendous decision, most important decision. They've heard the arguments, and we're going to hear the results sometime in the next week or two. This, to me, is a really big deal from someone who believes that the separation of powers, the division of power, and the checks and balances are some of the most important things that make our country what it is. Our response to this has been manyfold. We locked things down, and then we passed out money. We gave virtually everybody money. We just shook the money tree, and we gave it to people. And interestingly, polls show that people liked receiving checks. I just didn't know that would be true, but people actually liked receiving checks. But there was a French philosopher by the name of Bastiat, and he talked about the seen and the unseen, sort of the intended and the unintended. You can see the check you get, but you have to be observant to see what happens next, to see whether or not it actually buys what you think it's going to buy. So you get a $2,000 check, and a year later, what if the prices of all your goods and services have risen by $2,000? And you feel like, I got my check, how come I'm not richer? Even under ordinary times, we've only had 1.7% inflation over the last decade, 17% for a decade. Are there people that are of working class in our community and your community that didn't have a 17% raise? Maybe. And that's why people feel like they're treading water. I got raises, I've got a job, I've always been employed, and yet my wages didn't go up maybe 17%, that my prices did, and so I never really got ahead. I'm concerned that it's going to be much greater. There have been people talking about annualizing at 5%. There are people talking about some indications at 10%. Oil prices or gas prices aren't included in this. So you have inflation wages. What's the one thing we all buy? Gasoline, and it's not included in measuring inflation. But I'm worried about it. We borrowed somewhere between $3 and $4 trillion last year for all COVID add-on. We normally are borrowing $1 trillion a year. Our normal expenditures for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, food stamps, and military comprise most of our spending. With that spending, we bring in $3 trillion and we spend $4 trillion. Last year we added a couple trillion just thrown on top to give everybody checks. We're doing it again this year. We already passed a $2 trillion COVID relief bill. We're getting ready to do $1 trillion for infrastructure. But then Biden said the other day, we're only going to give you the $1 trillion in infrastructure if you give us 3 or 4 more trillion in Bernie gifts or whatever Bernie wants to pass. So we're going to have massive spending. We may add another $3 or $4 trillion. We've never accumulated this much debt in our country this fast. And you say, well, we're a great country. We'll get over it. In Venezuela, they destroyed their currency. Venezuela was not America, but it was the richest country in South America. They have more oil underground than Saudi Arabia, and they've destroyed their currency. The people are eating their pets literally in Afghanistan, and in Venezuela, probably Afghanistan too, but in Venezuela. My wife and I wrote a book called The Case Against Socialism to warn young people about this, because if you poll young people, over 50% say, oh, we ought to try socialism. Yeah, maybe we ought to try it, but it shouldn't be that bad. It's like, what are they teaching them in school? Make sure they teach them that socialism's bad. Every historical example of socialism is authoritarianism run amok, whether it's Stalin or Hitler. And yes, Hitler was a socialist, the National Socialist Workers' Party. People say, oh, no, he wasn't a socialist. It's like, well, yes, he was proud of his socialism. It was a terrible socialism. It was nationalized hatred of the Jews, racially motivated nationalized socialism. Mao. So I don't know if you've seen the president of Black Lives Matter is doing pretty well. Congratulations. You can be a capitalist while saying you're a Marxist. She's bought $4 million homes, and apparently walls work around, so she needs a $30,000 wall to keep the riffraff out of her house. Now she has a nice house. But I was thinking of this. My wife showed an interview with her, and this woman comes up to her, and they're all giddy, and it's this sort of handmade YouTube video, and she says, oh, I just loved your book. I loved your book, and it reminded me so much of Mao's Little Red Book. And the head of Black Lives Matter is like, oh, you get it. I can't believe you get it. That's so important to me that you get it. You get it, that's my role model, Mao. He killed 50 million people. They can't even, it's hard to estimate so many people were killed by Mao that the numbers are astronomical. there was a bureaucrat they sent out into one of the cities, and the city, the report had been that the dogs are eating the dead. So people dead everywhere, and the dogs are eating the dead. So the bureaucrat did his job. He went out to the city, and he wrote up his report, and he came back. He says, not true. He said the dogs are not eating the dead because they ate the dogs long ago. That's how desperate the times were. That's how desperate the famine was, the Great Famine. But this is happening in Venezuela as well. We tell the story in our book of a 16-year-old who's in a gang, and her territory is 4 dumpsters outside of restaurants to try to get food scraps. This is a country with more oil than Saudi Arabia. Socialism doesn't work. What's worked and made our country great, what's made us the richest country ever in the history of the world, is capitalism. The freedom to exchange your goods and services, to let the marketplace work, to largely leave you alone. That's what's created this great wealth. The poorest in our country are richer than most of the middle class in the rest of the world. We should be proud of that. If we don't understand where it came from, people think, oh, it just happened. We're smart, and progress is towards prosperity. The normal condition of mankind is poverty. Throughout almost all of the history of the world, man has lived in poverty. Before the Industrial Revolution, 96% of people lived on $2 a day, subsistence. They barely had enough food. You fast forward to when I was born in the 1960s, a third of the world lived in extreme poverty, $2 a day. We went from 96% of the world to a third. This is the entire world, not just the U.S. Today, less than 10% of the world lives on $2 a day. You won't hear that because everybody's so pessimistic and, oh, everything's so bad. No, the world's been getting better at a remarkable pace, but it didn't happen accidentally. We've got to understand what made our country great. We have to appreciate it. We shouldn't be dragging our country through the mud and saying what a terrible, rotten place it is and how terrible our history is and everybody hates each other based on race. Does anybody in here believe that racism is worse than when you were born? Every decade of my life, people have gotten along better. Every decade of my life, the kids and the people, the young people, I don't see them considering it at all. We go to churches that are integrated. We have marriages that are integrated. We have schools that are integrated. And people treat each other like people. It's been getting better for so long. Now they want us to teach, oh, the white kids need to sit over here, and the black kids want to sit over here. I thought we weren't supposed to be basing this world on the color of your skin, on the content of your character. Now we want the white kids to sit on one side and the black kids to sit. Now these are your oppressors, and you're going to have a terrible, crappy life because they hate you. It's not true, and what a terrible, rotten thing to teach our kids. What a terrible, hopeless sort of, horrible sort of future would it be if that were true? And none of it's true. But we got to make sure that we stay active, our local school board, all of that, to make sure that doesn't happen here. It sounds so absurd that it couldn't happen here, but it's happening across America. First grade teacher in Washington State is teaching her children with a picture book, her 6-year-old children, about a 2-year-old girl that wants to be a boy and how she can change her sexual appearance. Teaching this to 6-year-olds. That is bizarre. That shouldn't be in the schools. So I don't know, but we can't just lay down and let this kind of stuff happen. We have to be active in politics in our community and make sure people that the new normal is not that there is no normal, for goodness sakes. But I am optimistic for the future for our country. We're amazingly resilient despite the obstacles that government puts in our way. And I think we are a good people. I think we're at heart a good people. I think things are getting better. We need to continue to work on it, but I think it's a good country, a great country, getting better. I appreciate you all coming out today, and thank you very much.
Need assistance with federal agencies? Please contact our Bowling Green office or visit our website.